I read somewhere that you said that you could only spend 15 minutes with your old friends because after that
Yeah.
you failed to recognize each other.
No, you can spend a great deal longer than that, but you mustn't go to a pub. You mustn't do it in a bar. Because it begins to become money, you know. Because any time they write about me in Scotland, they say millionaire Billy Connolly or some money illusion. And it separates you, makes you further and further from your old pals until the most awful thing happens. If a guy's got a couple of pints in him and he's looking at you and you are this rich guy, he begins to feel like maybe he's a failure. It's totally wrong, but they think maybe there's an underachiever. And there's no such thing in my book as the highest achiever, and this sounds really pretentious. I know it's going to sound awful, but there was an old jock, the street sweeper in Drimmen. This lovely, he lived in the same street as me in Drimmen. He was the most complete person I ever met, and I used to laugh. I would drive down the street, and there'd be some American tourist had made the mistake of asking Jock for directions, and he would be saying poems about the salmon, and he pronounced it that Scottish country way, salmon, as if it's got a U in it. And he had written poems about salmon, and he'd be looking at a snail in the street and attracting people's attention to it. The most complete guy I ever met. So it's got nothing to do with money, you know. It's doing what you think you should be doing, I think.
Did you say earlier that you knew you were an entertainer from the word go, for just cracking jokes in the shipyard?
Yeah, I felt it really
Not
quick.
singing, being a comedian.
Being funny.
Being funny.
Yeah, being funny. But you see, and I was at school, I loved being funny. I loved cracking my friends up in the class or out of the class. When I was an apprentice, I loved cracking them up because they were funny people, you know. And if they would allow me in with some my tuppence worth. But I didn't know how to become a comedian. I told my father I wanted to be one, and I told the science teacher, a guy called Bill Sheridan, that I wanted to be a comedian. And he made fun of me, but he came up on the quiet later and said, "That's great. What are you going to do?" You know. And he would talk about Tommy Morgan and all that.
And how quickly? I mean, there's comedians and different styles of comedy. How quickly did you settle on the long sort of wandering monologue?
Oh, that took years and years, because I became a folk singer first. I read in the paper I was a comedian. Really. It's a comedian, but I thought, my God, I've cracked it. I thought I was a funny folk singer because I was too hairy for cabaret and far too scruffy and wild for variety theatre. They couldn't send me on with Jimmy Logan, you know. You'd frighten people. It was full of old women in wet raincoats. I mean, they would cry if I came marching on. The guy who was really good to me was Jimmy Shand. I did some gigs with him. He said, "My God, you're going to make it big, son. You better prepare yourself." Because he's in Stranraer. He said, "You're going to do it. You better get ready."
Is there something macho about the longer you can go on if you're up there in front of an audience? Do you want to break the record, to just be there longer than anybody else has ever been there, making them laugh?
No. What do you mean, the length of the career or the length of the act?
The length of the act.
The length of the hours,
Yeah.
yeah. No, mine has become... I was speaking to Mike Harding about this, because he's another one who can't get off. It's the shape of the material that states how long you should be up there. Mine, I don't do one-liners. Unless I hear an awful funny one, I'll sling it in somewhere. But they're rarely mine. They usually belong to someone else. But my material it's become so lumpy and strange, and there's a sort of, it pretends to be a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, but it hasn't. It's an illusion. It's just, I don't know what it is. It's this camouflage, this big thing that looks like a story. It's a jumble of ad-libs and fantasies, all living, tenuously linked to one another. But it's become it takes a long time to tell.
Are the things that make us laugh what you find funny?
Yes. Well, I'm very lucky now because I have found my audience. This is a thing the press can't live with. Because they don't know about things like this. Although they indeed have found their audience, and they tell them how awful I am, but they're telling the wrong people. They don't come and see me. You know, they miss the boat with monotonous regularity. I have found my audience, and they like me and I like them, and that's about the beginning, the middle, and end.
Was there a point where you'd found that audience and radio and television were still frightened of you?
Yes, I think it's still with us. They're still very apprehensive about me, because I might rear up at them, you know. I might swear in the middle of it all, and I just bloody might too, you know. They're absolutely right.
I can still remember watching you on a Parkinson show where you told a story about somebody getting buried in the backyard.
Oh, that made me famous. And the bum sticking out the ground and the parking the bicycle. A man told me that in Valencia in Spain. I went to see Scotland play in Spain. The last game Charlie Cook ever played. Me and Frankie Miller. Was Peter McDougall there? I'm sure was Peter with us. But Frankie was anyway. And we were a bit drunk and got to the game. And we were, yes! We'd been drinking that brandy. It's a number, 711 or 362.
Sienitres.
Oh, right. So we're giving it that. And we were all in very good form. And a man ran over and told me the joke, and ran, a Scottish guy, and ran back over to his pals. And I was leaning against a wall, roaring with laughter. And driving into this building, I was with my manager, Frank Lynch, and I said, I think I'll tell Parkinson that bum joke, the bicycle and the bum. He said, for God's sake, don't. This is the biggest chance you've ever had. Don't blow it. If you tell that, you're finished. Let me tell you right now, boy, you'll never get a break like this. I've just managed, because he was so proud, he had held off. Who's that guy for Yorkshire? He's dead now, the talk show guy. Do you remember him? It was a Yorkshire talk show host who died, but he was kind of competing with Parky, and he didn't want me on it. He wanted me on the big one, you know. And he was saying to me, "Now look, you could have been on this other guy. I've got Parkinson. Don't let me down." And I went for it because I knew instinctively I should.
Did the BBC appreciate it when you did?
Oh well, Parky did, and that was the beginning, the middle, and the end, as far as that went. Because how could they disapprove when everybody's howling with laughter? That's the proof of the pudding. That's where television falls down, because you can actually be a comedian and nobody's laughing. You can actually do that. Now, can you imagine you being a football player and you can't dribble? Or you can't pass a ball?
There's quite a few of them around.
Yeah, well, there's no shortage. But you know, but live is the answer. The laugh is everything.
Was it difficult to break through to English audiences, or not to find a point on it, on audiences that found your accent difficult?
Never once. I've never had a problem, ever. Because as I said, I was a folk singer, and all the great clubs were here in England. All down, right, not much Wales, but right down to Cornwall, through the north, the Midlands. I used to love the Midlands, you know, Solihull and Walsall. Then it would be all Bolton, Blackburn, Oswald, Twistle. And in the west of Scotland, there was very little. You couldn't charge to get into a lounge bar, you see, so that held them back. East of Scotland, Fife, yeah, certainly. Aberdeenshire, brilliant. So I was well used to England, and I'd always kind of thought English, because I'd been reading P.G. Wodehouse since I was a little boy. I'd become a kind of Anglophile. I liked England. You know, all my life I'd been reading comics. It was all public school. It was Billy Bunter and all those guys and Lord Snooty. It was all about England. I was no stranger to the place. And Biggles, you know, and the famous Five. So I was no, but P.G. Wodehouse, more than anybody, had given me a love of this England that didn't actually exist. It only exists in individuals. And I keep meeting them, you know, like John Mortimer. I mean, I think P.G. Wodehouse, not him. He doesn't actually
You don't
exist.
think he's Billy Bunter?